big question is for this season: are we still in Next Generation trivia, or have we?
We are. Yeah, I figured we didn't really do much Next Generation. I wanted to linger there a little bit longer.
Let's stick with it. Otherwise, we're going to run through the series too quickly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I don't want to do Discovery, so.
Yeah, I feel like since I've not seen Discovery, my answers will be about my average of
About the
batting
same.
average will be about the same. It might improve. All right, what's our Star Trek trivia then, Eric?
Okay. I don't know the answer to this one. What is the significance of the repeated use of the number 47 throughout the modern Star Trek series? A. Episode 47 was executive producer Rick Berman's first script. B. Writer Joe Menosky began to include it as a joke in his early scripts. C. It is the unofficial answer to the ultimate question of life. It's very unofficial. 47.
In the Star Trek universe.
In the Star Trek universe, yes. Or D. It is Gene Roddenberry's birthday, March 7th. I don't know the answer to that.
Put a worker here, get a resource. Put a worker here, get a resource.
I don't mean this to be overly harsh.
Put a worker here, get a resource. Put a worker here, get a resource.
So I think it's going to come off that way.
Well, now you can go here if you pay money.
Maybe you live 1,000 years, except for Greg.
Welcome to a piece of the action. I'm Micah.
I'm Eric.
And I'm Greg still.
And we're going to be taking a look at Charterstone. So Charterstone came out in 2017 by Jamie Stegmaier. And I think this is our Stegmaier. We did Fenris, right? Did Scythe?
Scythe,
Yeah.
yes.
So
Scythe.
this is our second Stegmaier game. Is that right? Is there any?
We didn't do Wingspan, did we?
No, we haven't done Wingspan. Yeah, I think this is only the second.
Okay. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think.
But Wingspan isn't Stegmaier anyways. It's just this company published it.
Right.
True.
But this is also, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is our first Legacy game, right?
It is. Yes.
Right. So from 1 to 6 players, 45 to 75 minutes playing time is what it's rated there, and we've all played this together, the 3 of us plus 3 other nameless individuals, and so I actually have a bit of a first-person experience with it as well, but I'm not the professional here. You guys are, so so we're more interested in what you guys
we make
think
all
of
of
it.
our money.
Yeah.
Playing board
Professional
games
implies you pay me, Micah. I'm waiting for my check.
I mean, we are down for that. I mean, we've been at this for a whole season, people. We have,
Right.
What have we made? 7 cents?
Almost.
If you want to join our Patreon.
Yeah. Exactly. So, all right. So let's start talking about Charterstone then. Greg, maybe you can give us a brief overview of both the premise and sort of how the rules of Charterstone go. Oh, and I want to say before we start, we are making every attempt to have this be a spoiler-free review. So hopefully we'll be able to stick to that. But in any type of long, complex discussion, it's hard to guarantee ahead of time that we'll perfectly remember every little thing. And so there might be minor spoilers, but we'll do our best to avoid them.
So the premise-wise, I feel like I'm gonna get chewed out here because it's hard for me to like put the premise of this game into words. And even then, I worry about spoiling things there because there is kind of a story that goes along with this game, and none of that's revealed until you sit down and start playing. But the basic idea is you're in some sort of a light fantasy-ish world, I guess, kind of cartoon characters to me. And you're kind of building up your little villages, and you are collecting. I mean, the way it's played is you collect resources, you use these buildings that are in your village, you collect resources, and then you go on to turn them into points, basically. And I'm trying to avoid what I know about the game now, and I'm only going to talk about what you'll see set up on the very first game. But it's basically the mechanisms behind it is worker placement. You have 2 workers. You put them out, you take the action on the building like normal. This one has a bumping mechanism. I think it's something that's a little different about this one, where if you can go to a space where someone is already on it, but you bump that worker back to them. So if you put both of your workers out, they don't come back automatically. They only come back if someone bumps them, or if both of your workers out and no one bumped anything, you have to basically waste a turn to call them back to you. So that's kind of the underlying mechanism. And through that, you're collecting resources. And then with those resources, you either meet objectives. That's like one thing that's on the side. Just 3 objectives. They're different. They're random every game. It might be something like collect all the resources, or do this many things and go here and collect points. Or you can use resources to build new buildings that you can put into your village. Or you can fight on this influence track, where basically it's just whoever has the most influence here at the end of the game gets this many points, second gets this many points. And there's a couple other places like that. But it's at its core, it's really just a worker placement, resource collecting, cash it out for victory points type game.
Okay. So then, Eric, why don't you speak a little bit then to the theme of the game in terms of sort of being a group of people coming together to build a village, or, you know, in other aspects, you know, that the theme kind of reveals itself in a little more detail as the story goes on. How do you feel that it did when it came to matching up to the theme as promised?
Yeah, well, I like Greg said, I think the theme they were going for was whimsical and fantastical with a kind of a subtle dark twist kind of thing. But I think the theme that they got was colorful stickers and cute wooden pieces on cardboard. The story, quote unquote story, as Greg said, is about a group of enthusiastic frontier types going out and founding a new town for their king. But the game doesn't feel like anything other than like a generic worker placement. And I know Greg likes to talk about the feel of the game, but if I may, I think the feel of the game kind of changes depending on how long you've been playing it, because in the beginning of the game, in the first like 3-ish games, I found myself pulling levers, pushing buttons, and trying to figure out what was important to me. And, you know, I was like, okay, you know, the bumping thing. I thought bumping was going to be a big deal, like trying to get to places where other people would bump you back so you could use it again. That ended up not really being true. You know, it ended up not, in my opinion, at least my mileage, it didn't go very far. Middle game, around games 4 to 7, I think it started to feel like that's when your engine was really starting to take off and rev up a little, and you could see at that point what you were lacking, whether or not you had a good shot at winning. And then the last half of the game, I think, turned into, it felt like a bit of a slog. And I know I'm getting into good and bad here, but it slowed down significantly at the end. And you know, really at that point in the game, there's not enough time to switch your main strategy, I don't think. But there's still plenty of games ahead of you to either lose or fall behind in. And I feel like the last half of the game felt, if we're talking about the way the game felt, it felt pretty long by the end. Now, bear in mind, this was our COVID game. So just so everybody knows, we played the first 12?
You played the first 5? Yes, there's 11. There's 12 games in this total.
We played 11
We played
games.
11 of them before COVID.
And then COVID happened for a year and a half. We had to sit on this thing. And when we got back to it, so everyone watching should bear that in mind, that our final impression of this game was drastically influenced by that massive
We
delay.
do have a year and a half gap between our 11th game and 12th game. I think it's an important thing to point out. But
I mean, I think to your point, though, those impressions you're describing, I don't think all come from game 12.
I don't think so, but it's hard to tell because the last game you play in a legacy game is gonna make, I think it has an
It's weighted more than the others.
It's weighted more. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, it kind of talks about, it sounds like you sort of covered your feelings on feel of play. If that's correct, we can go ahead and move to Greg with that also. Greg, how did you feel in terms of feel of play? What does it feel like to play Charterstone?
I think it feels like what I normally call an efficiency Euro. I think that's kind of what you have to come into this game expecting, which is different, I think, than most of the other legacy games in the market, which tend to be very narrative focused. Yeah, to me, this is an efficiency euro that, and you know, what's different about this game to me, if we're talking about the legacy aspect, the feel of the game is it, to me, instead of say moving through like a story or moving through a journey, this game felt like to me, like you were kind of building up a game over the course of a campaign. And at the end of the campaign, you kind of have your own little customized euro game.
That's actually that's what Stegmeyer said actually in the interview. Did you read that?
No, I did not.
He said that for him, a legacy meant building the game and not the story. So,
well, then he succeeded because that's how it felt to me. It didn't necessarily feel like I was moving through. You know, I always think of legacy games. I always describe there's a difference between like a normal game. I always think of as like episodic television, whereas to me, a legacy game is more serialized television. Over the course of a season, you're getting an arc in the story, and you're getting a big slam conclusion. That's to me how, now just to be clear, I've only ever played Risk Legacy. That's the only legacy game I can compare it with. But even reading about other legacy games, they seem to be more going for that arc. Whereas to me, this game did not feel that way. It felt more like, here, let's build up your own game. And at the end, you have a game that's completed that you can also continue playing. So if that's what he's going for, I think he succeeded. But yeah, it's an efficiency euro. It just feels to me, it's resource collecting and then trading those up for other things and trading those up for points. So it's very much pulling levers and looking for the best, most efficient path. I would say, as far as the weight and interaction and stuff like that go, I think this is a very non-interactive game. There's very minimal points where you're interacting with other players. It's more focused on your engine. And I would say the game starts pretty light, but by the end, it's probably more towards mid-weight. So
you can't even really block people. Like you said, you bump them, but
you bump people, that's it. So
you can't like not hate draft, but like hate worker place because
no,
you're not blocking
can't.
anything.
I mean, most of the interaction comes from, well, it's choice denial, like they usually are, right? It's me getting to, well, it's not even really the work, you're right, because you get bumped. So it's not even that. Getting to that influence track over by, I forget what they call that, the one where you can put, you're fighting for this kind of area control-ish type thing, but you're really just putting things on a track. Or getting certain things that are only available to one person. But really, there's very few points of interaction. So it's pretty light on that.
As far as, well, maybe we'll save that for the good and the bad. I have some questions specifically pertaining to the legacy nature of it. But I think, why don't we go ahead and first let's talk about the strategies and priorities. What are some things that you might want to think about as a new person coming into the game? Greg, you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, and there's 2 points to talk about here with legacy games. There's strategy you have for each individual game, and then there's strategy over the long haul. And I'll try to talk about this without spoiling much. But for me, I think when you sit down for a game of strategy, I said there's 3 objective cards that get put out. And these are different goals that you have to reach. And once you've achieved those goals, you can go there and you score like 5, 6, 7 points, depending on certain things. But for example, can we have this much money? Go here. Have one of every resource. Go here, get the points. Those are not, everyone's allowed to go there. It's not choice denial. They're always available to you. But I do believe you have to get those at some point. They're pretty big points there. So what I do when I first sit down again, I look at those 3 things and go, okay, at some point, I normally have this much money. I normally have this many resources because I need to do these things to get these objectives. And then from there, I can kind of retroactively work out my game plan. I can almost plan out the whole game I'm going to do from those. Okay, well, if I'm going to do this, if I get the coins first, then I can go to this space. I can spend the coins here, and that will give me the resources I need to go here, and that will give me that objective. And I can pretty much map out my whole game, to be honest with you, from the beginning. But I kind of just hinge everything on those objective cards.
When you say the whole game, like that whole single game.
Yeah, that whole single game. Each game, because they're different every game. So I sit down, I look at those, and I use that as the skeleton or the framework of how I'm going to approach that particular game.
Right.
As far as in a legacy aspect, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say the buildings that you build are obviously important. There can be a lot of big points that can be had there at the end of the campaign. And on top of that, there's other things that you can pick up. I don't think it's a spoiler to talk about, like there's assistants, right? You have one in the beginning. There's different things that you're going to open up and you're going to see, and using all of these things to be synergistic with each other, it's kind of a big deal, right? So as you open one up, because you'll have your own personal collection of items, making sure that they synergize with each other is an engine that you can kind of reuse over and over again each game. So when you're thinking about legacy aspects, you can kind of think of, all right, how can I synergize this stuff so that in future games I can use this engine again or something like that.
Okay. Greg or Eric, what about you? Tips?
So going off of what Greg said about building an engine and building synergy, I just want to build off of that and say that a good strategy is to make sure that that's happening in your own charter. So everybody gets their own section of the board. And putting buildings, again, Greg's right. There are two strategies. There are two types of strategies. There's the single game strategy, which you just look at the objective cards and kind of build your game off of that. Long-term strategy is about what are you building in your charter, because there are, without spoiling anything, there are major benefits to having a good synergistic engine. This building triggers this building allows me to do this building in your own charter. You can place your workers anywhere on the board, but you are incentivized to build an engine that works within your own little fief, so to speak. Then the one thing that I would say, and I don't know if I'm right about this or not, I did pretty good in this game. I didn't win, but I felt like the influence tokens they're an interesting resource, because all they really do is you start with a bunch of them and then you spend them at certain points to go to particularly important spots on the board. And I felt like that was a timing, an inborn timer into the game, because as soon as you run out of influence, the game speeds up. And I feel like a good strategy might be going to places that get you points and cost influence, because then the game will end sooner and other players hopefully won't be able to pop off their combos that they need. So when you're building your charter, try and choose buildings that get you points and reduce your influence. I might be totally off the mark on that one, but because that having been said, you also need to remember that once you've spent all your influence, you're still going to have several turns that you'll need to play, even though you've run out of it. So make sure you still have a way to make some points during that end game phase. But the sooner you can blow through those influence points, the faster the game will end. And you can use that as a tool. I guess that's my point. You can use that as a tool if you've got a lot of points coming in at the beginning of the game.
Okay. So let me ask you both a question that I think we can ask that bears on strategy and priority without being super spoilery. The rule set will change as you go along, and also obviously what the other players do are going to give different people a different type of game. How much planning and strategizing can you do ahead of time with the rules that are there versus how wildly would my potential plan swing left or right because of what's going to come? If that question makes sense. Sort of, I'm asking not for specifics of what happens, but proportionally.
Sure.
Yeah, Eric.
I think that this game is not terribly. It's going to be hard to plan out a strategy, because while it doesn't look on the surface of the game like there's a lot of randomness, I think the randomness that is in the game is pretty important. So the cards that come up, the cards that become available, whether or not certain types of cards come up can really screw up your engine. And so, like I had whole games that were like, well, these cards aren't popping up for me, so I'm this one's a loss for me. So I think that you can try your best, but I feel like there's a strong element of randomness in this game.
And I would say if you're asking about do any of the legacy openings kind of mess up your strategy, I don't. I think for the most part, and I kind of want to return to this later too, but I think for the most part, it's nothing unexpected happens to the point where it's like, oh, now this completely ruins this thing I was trying to do. Like I don't think the legacy openings are that dramatically altering of your game. That what you kind of have, even if you don't know what's coming up, you can kind of have a good idea what you should focus on still, I guess. Even if it's not 100% clear how the game's going to look 5 games from now, you still have a basic idea of what's good and what's bad. I don't think the openings alter that very dramatically.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I kind of want to return to this.
Okay.
Later.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead then. We'll get your opportunity because now we're going to go into talking about the good and the bad. So, Greg, first of all, let's talk about the good. What did you like about Charterstone?
So I mentioned this in the field of play, but I did think it was interesting how it did feel like you were building a game from scratch to have a complete game at the end. I've only played Risk Legacy as a legacy game, but I'm pretty familiar with all the big names that are out there of what they're doing. But it feels like this is fairly unique to this. Like this is a game where you're kind of expected to keep on playing when you're done with the campaign. Like it's almost like this is a preamble to playing the real game in some ways. Whereas for me, when I got done with Risk Legacy, I was like, okay, we're done. That was fun. Let's put it away and never come back to it. But this game, it feels more like let's build a game for the group and now we'll play the game. So that's kind of how I think that's an interesting idea. And because of that, when you're opening up these new legacy things, it feels more like you're opening up modules and kind of expansions for the game as you come along. And so you're kind of also getting like this rules tutorial as you go through. Start out very simple. Hey, here's a new module. Here's what it does. Here's a new module. Here's what it does. So this, in the end, I think if you like this game when you're playing through the legacy stuff, this is a game that you could definitely return to and still enjoy. Also, it's much more Euro. So if that's something you're interested in, you look at a lot of legacy games and you're like, oh, I'm not a big fan of the thematic stuff or the narrative stuff. This is definitely a more Euro-focused game. So if that appeals to you, if I say efficiency Euro, and you also want to try some legacy, well, this is your game. I think that's what this is good for. So it does kind of those aspects do kind of make this different from the other legacy games in the market that I've seen, anyways.
Okay. All right. Eric, what about you? What did you like about Charterstone?
Similar. If your jam is worker placement and you've got a group of players that just all love worker placement games and they want to design a worker placement game that is customized to them, then there's nothing else that can really compete with Charterstone. So if you can play weekly for 5 or 6 hours with a group that just loves worker placement games and you're not going to have a pandemic in the middle of it, this is your jam. This is for you. Also, it does give you plenty of branching paths, albeit only, in my opinion, in the first half of the game that you can experiment with. And to that end, Greg didn't mention this, but you can buy a recharge pack for this game, flip the board over, and do it again. So technically, you could have 2 customized Charterstones in one box, which is pretty cool. And like I said, I don't think there's not really anything else that does that.
Yeah,
and,
actually, it'd be really interesting to like play this game again, knowing what's coming up, and intentionally trying to create a second board that's, with the knowledge of what's to come. I think it'd be.
I agree. A big part of me is interested in theoretically playing it again, because so much of my first 4 or 5 games was floundering and like, I don't know what's important here. I think that changes if you've got a group of people who are very familiar with worker placement, efficiency Euro type games, then you're probably going to hit the ground running on this game, and it's not going to feel like that. But if you're not particularly, if you can't look at the board state and be like, this is important, this is what I need to focus on from the get-go, then your first few games, you might need that recharge pack to do it again and feel like you know what you're doing the second time through. There's nothing really new in the core mechanics, but like I said, if you're jonesing for a customized worker placement game that you and your group can build together, and continue to play after the legacy part is done, that's pretty unusual too. Once the legacy part's done, you can keep playing the game. Yeah, this one is for your group.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm kind of laughing because basically it doesn't sound like a lot good with the game. Exactly. It sounds like both of you are basically saying the thing that's good about this game is that if it happens to be your type of game, you'll like it.
Yeah, that's right.
Kind
if
of,
you like this
kind of.
game, it's good.
But to be fair, there's not a lot of games that do this that is also legacy.
Yeah.
So,
It
but
is unique.
I need you to open up the bad can.
Yeah, I'm going to. I know that that's where the bulk of this video is gonna fall. So, all right, Greg, since you've asked, why don't I'll give you the first crack at what did you feel that Charterstone could have ever so slightly improved upon?
Yeah. So yeah, of course, this whole time I'm talking about if we were to play again, you can play this when you're done, and it'd be kind of neat to play a second campaign, knowing stuff. But the honest truth is, I will never play this game again. I have no desire to keep playing on our finished board, and I have no desire to play another campaign. And there's a few reasons for it. I didn't hate the game. I don't get that clear. I didn't hate the game, but well, let me just go through it. First off, I mean, it's always a death knell for me. There's just no interaction in this game. I mean, I know modern games always want to weaken the worker placement, the Agricola style. If I'm here, you can't even go here. And they're always trying to do stuff like, well, now you can go here if you pay money, or now you can go here if you do this other thing. This is like not even that. It's just like the negative of you going to a spot that someone's at is you just bump their person back. Oh man, it's just such a non-negative interaction.
So such a light touch.
It's such a light touch. That to me is not interaction. And then the other places, it's just, oh, I guess I don't get first place in this influence track we were going for. I don't know. To me, or even if the goals or the objectives were like, hey, if I get it first, you can't go there or something. But there's just very, very little interaction in this game, and that's always my death knell for a game to me. And then we get into like the strategy. For me, I always say I can deal with lack of interaction if the strategy is interesting. And it's not in this game for me. It's like I said before, I look at the objective cards and I can basically strategize out my whole game, what I'm going to do. But I just found those strategies to be very simplistic and baked into the board, and it just wasn't that interesting. Now, I think what makes it worse for Charterstone is I rail against this all the time in board games, because most modern Euro games are kind of like this to me. They're baked in strategies. But I'm a little more lenient on stuff. Like, for example, we did a Dune Imperium, which I kind of said I felt strategies were kind of baked in. But I enjoyed that game more, I think, because I can imagine playing that game 4 or 5 times, and then I'm done. I'm good. I've seen it, what it has to offer. But with this game, once you lock in, you're kind of forced to play 12 games of this. And when I already think the strategies are not that interesting, playing the game 12 times to me just kind of makes it worse. And I don't think the unlocks change that drastically enough. Okay, let's talk about the arc of the story a little bit. I thought the first couple of games of this didn't feel like a game at all. I mean, it felt like an incomplete game to me. Again, in fairness, this is a while ago due to the pandemic, but I have pretty vivid memories of my first game of Charterstone being put a worker here, get a resource. Put a worker here, get a resource. Take my guys back. Put a worker here, get a resource. Put a worker here, get a resource. Take my guys back.
You don't find that thrilling? That's the game, Greg.
Go here and trade in those resources for points.
I mean, that's quintessential worker placement.
Yeah. And then hope someone bumps you at some point. And that's really what the first few. It honestly took. It didn't get, not until we got to like games 3 and up, I think. Did it even feel like a complete game to me? Like in the beginning, it just felt like a prototype. So that was an issue to me. There is an issue with what to focus on. In the beginning, you don't really know how you're going to win the campaign. I get a lot of legacy games to do this, but I do have a slight issue with it because it's like, well, how do I win? Where's the points coming from?
Well, I think
It's
that
not
the story
always
needs to be compelling if that's the case. If it's
Exactly.
not about the victory, then the story better be awesome.
Yeah, which this one's not. I did not. I mean, I'm not usually the story guy, but the story in this one was particularly dull to me.
Well, the way you interact with the story is pretty limited. Your contact points with the story,
Yeah,
right?
and yeah, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but basically, yeah, you just at the end of your game, you read the next section and like, okay, that's what's going on, and then during the game, you're not even thinking about the story. It's not even
Not at all.
relevant at all. All right, and then the final thing I want to talk about is the actual legacy aspect of this game, the openings. Again, I only played Risk Legacy, so maybe I'm biased. But I just felt the openings in this game lacked oomph compared to that. And maybe that's just my expectations coming in. But when I played Risk Legacy, it was exciting opening up a pack. It changed things dramatically. It felt like, oh, what's in this? Oh, this is crazy. Oh, I can't wait to try this out. And then the thing about, I mean, I'm not a big Risk fan. I'm not a big dice chucking fan. But still, in Risk Legacy, it was okay because you open up something, okay, you play it, and just as you're about to get bored of it, you open up a new package, and oh wow, this changes everything. Now I want to try this new. This one, nothing that opened up was even remotely interesting. There was never a point where we opened something up and the table went, ooh, what's that? No one did that. And I'm going to mention something. If you've played this, you're going to know what I'm talking about. But there's the one thing that legacy opening that's in this game that I think they thought was cool was the worst gimmick I've ever seen in a board game. If you've played it, you know exactly the opening I'm talking about. But there's one opening that I think they thought, oh, this is going to blow their minds. And when you read what it actually does, it's like, oh, that's kind of stupid. But anyways, so everything else was just, that's the other thing too. Like even after you open a few of the openings, I think you
Post in the comments below if you know what that is.
Yeah, you know it. But after you open up a few of the openings, you also kind of have an idea what other openings are probably going to be.
Yeah.
Like, so even then, it kind of spoils it for you. In fact, there's one where it doesn't even attempt to not spoil things for you, where you open up the one thing and you just kind of see all the other things that are coming up for it. It's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I know what the next 5 openings are. I don't know. There's just a lot of stuff like that. I don't even think they believed that their openings were that interesting. Yeah, so it kind of felt like an incomplete game to me the whole way through, I'll be honest. And it kind of felt like you needed to play those 12 games to get to a full game before it even remotely got interesting. But by then, I was so burnt out on the game, I just had no desire to go back to it or play again. So it just wasn't a journey for me. It just wasn't a journey. It felt like I was forced to play 12 games of a mediocre Euro game that I didn't really care for. So that's where I'm at.
All right, Eric, what do you think Charterstone could have done better?
So I don't hate worker placement games. I like worker placement games, but I need more than just worker placement mechanics to keep my interest. And there's not enough in this game. There's not much else in this game that even, in my opinion, even tried to keep my attention. I think it felt like the designers, I think the designers felt like the worker placement aspect of this game was riveting enough to keep your attention for 12 games. And unfortunately, it's not for me. Usually in a legacy game, it's the story that fills that role. You don't need epic mechanics because the story is pushing things along. But the story felt like an afterthought to me. So, yeah. And though technically you can place your main workers anywhere on the board, the game ultimately incentivizes placing only in your little charter. So as the game progresses, as it goes on, it starts to feel more and more like multiplayer solitaire, which is not fun.
Yeah.
Not usually. Some games can pull it off. This is not one of them.
Yeah. Honestly, by the end of if you asked me like what the other 5 players were doing in their charters,
no idea.
I don't even think I know. I have no clue.
Because I'm not even really interested in playing in putting my workers in their charters because I've got my little engine going in mine. So it's like, maybe if I really needed a pumpkin, I would look over and be like, okay, I guess I have to put something over there. But yeah, other than that, no reason to. As far as the long-term deep strategies go, I know I mentioned this before, but I think it's hard to make anything work because if the cards are against you, like in my personal experience with the game, I found that my engine, which I had started up in the early part of the game, which was kind of centered on, I don't think this is a spoiler. It was about, it lost its oomph, it lost its power at about game 9, and I couldn't switch to anything better because nothing else came up in the cards. It's kind of hard to at that point in the game, it's hard to build new buildings, and that's what I needed to do to change my strategy, and I couldn't do that. Now, that's not to say that I didn't miss something. It's quite possible that if I was more familiar with the game, if I, for instance, played it again, knowing what was in store, that I might be able to hit the ground running a little better, and that I might actually end up having more agency than I thought I did. But like Greg said, the fun factor of this game is not high enough on the surface to make me even want to attempt to do that.
It's interesting too about that bump mechanic, just to return to it. I think they were kind of banking on it a lot, but it just came up so rarely. And because I didn't know what other players were doing, I couldn't even like plan ahead. Like, well, if I go here, they have to go here, because it was so.
I tried that. That was my like in my first part of the game. I was like, okay, this bump thing, this is what the game is about. So I'm going to make sure I go to places that lets me get my worker back so I can take more turns. And since this is an efficiency thing, it didn't turn out to be that important.
No, it's so open.
That big of a deal.
It's so open, and you're so kind of disconnected from what everyone's doing. It's hard to even predict that. I just want to put out there, if you like the bump idea mechanic, I think Gallerist does it far better. So that's because there's only 4 spots, so you get bumped a lot, and it's actually a pretty big deal. But in this game, the bump mechanic was just not interesting.
Yeah, I feel like I got bumped maybe 10% of the time. Like every now and then it happened, but it wasn't,
Yeah, I mean, it felt good when it happened. Like, oh, sweet, I don't have to pass. But it just,
it didn't really change anything that was going on. Okay, well, let me then before we get into final thoughts, or maybe tell me if this overlaps with any of your final thoughts, but based on what you guys have said, as well as just my own experience with it, I want to talk about, first of all, the issue of the spiral of death in legacy games, right? Is it inherently sort of maybe bad conceptually when you're going to have a game where it is all about efficiency, right? To where if you get behind a little bit, it gets really hard to catch up. Is it a good idea to marry that to a 12-game, mandatory thing, or is that going to always inherently be problematic? Because I feel the same way, Eric, you did when I first started. Didn't really know what was important, kind of looked around. By the time I started to even have some interesting ideas to try, we were 2 or 3 games in, tried a few. Yeah. And by then, the people who were winning were, uncatchable. And you still have 6 games to go.
Exactly.
Right. So how can you keep your enthusiasm? So is there a problem conceptually there, or is it a problem just with the particular execution here of Charterstone?
I think it's the execution. They even built in there's a catch-up mechanic built into this game that didn't even really work. It's an undefined catch-up mechanic, but it exists, and it didn't really do anything. I think that you're right. I think it's a hard line to tread. That balance between meaningful individual games and avoiding a runaway winner. That is hard to do. I actually really like, though I haven't finished it yet, and I know it's not technically a legacy game, I really like the idea of Rise of Fenris in Scythe. You play a bunch of games. You play 8 games or something like that, and none of them matter. All they do is give you minor perks if you win, and then the last game, whoever wins the last game wins the whole campaign. I think that's kind of cool. It's like
That is
it's
an interesting way of handling it.
all riding on the last game, and I think that would help mitigate something like that. But in this one, it's all about the victory points. So yeah, there was a spiral of death, runaway winner problem in this that I don't think it was success. I don't think it successfully mitigated that.
Yeah, I mean it's a fair question because in solitaire games, not solitaire people, but like games that are not legacy, I am 100% on board with runaway leaders. In fact, I prefer that they have it because I don't like games that hold your hand if you're losing. So, but I agree, in a legacy game, it's more of a problem because if you get so far behind, when I play Food Chain Magnate and I'm way behind, I know, okay, well, I'll do better next game, or let's wrap it up and do
in an hour it's going to be done. But
but in a legacy game where I'm thinking, okay, I got to drive over to Eric's place to play this game. I mean, I'm assuming this is what it feels like when you're losing these games.
Thanks, Greg.
Greg can only imagine what it's like.
But it's like it's different when you're going to play a whole game that like the greater game you're playing, you can't win. Yeah. And I agree, and I think that's the reason why a lot of legacy games probably focus more on the narrative, right? You're still along for the ride. Even if you're losing, it's like, oh, well, I still want to see what's going to be open next. Even though I'm losing, I still want to see what's next, what the next turn of events is going to be.
Or like with Fenris, like even though I've lost every game up to this point, there is a chance that if I just nail this last game, that I'll come off the winner. Which honestly, if there was ever a high five moment, that would be it.
That's
true. You lost everything, and then it all rides on that last one. I love that idea.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. That's probably an issue in Charterstone.
I mean, I think that. I think we said, because we were talking about like the next one. I feel like, if it was a game where to buy into it, to do it, you were committing to like a 30-year, series of games, right? Then it would be a serious problem to fall behind and never catch up. So it's just the longer the run goes, the more and more uninvested people become, and maybe they were just counting on the actual gameplay being more fun than we found it to be. Maybe if I was losing, but it was the individual games were just more fun, I would have
honestly
so much, but
I think, and I don't mean this to be overly harsh, though I think it's going to come off that way. Stonemaier Games is they've been riding high for a long time with Scythe and with Wingspan. They've got hits, and I feel like they wanted to do a legacy game, and I don't besmirch them that desire. I don't think it's wrong of them to have wanted to do a legacy game, but I feel like they're just like, okay, now we've got to put our legacy game into our catalog, and it could have used some more objective opinions, I think, to third parties saying, this is not great. That having been said, I do think it did some stuff that no other legacy game does, but that's not enough to carry it.
Okay. Well, the other question I had was similar, talking about possibly things that are flawed in concept. The other idea that was mentioned is this idea that you build the game as you go, right? That it's not in its finished form. To me, I feel like there's an issue there, right? Because I feel like we're not the game designers. There's no reason to expect that the way it happens to land, either through our deliberate attempts or randomness or the combination, will particularly result in a super, interesting, compelling game to play at the end. So how do you guys feel about that in concept? I guess basically same question. Do you feel like this did a good job at it, or did it fail? Did it fail because it was a bad idea to do that, or just because of the way they executed it?
I don't think it's a bad idea in concept. I just think it's something Charterstone didn't handle very well. Because it was never interesting. There's a lot of states of the game that weren't interesting, but I don't think it was because of the way we built it. I think it's just the underlying mechanisms weren't interesting to me. But the idea that yeah, we're not game designers, but in the middle of any game of Go or Food Chain Magnate or any of these games I love, the board game designer never specifically said this is a game state that's going to exist at some point. The underlying mechanisms are solid enough that whatever game state we end up in, it's usually interesting.
Mhm.
And I think that can be the same case with building up a game from scratch. I like that concept, actually. And I would like to see a game that does it better, because on top of it, because it's also like expansions, right? It's like saying, which expansions to use. If I play Carcassonne, there's like dozens of modules I can add to it. I can pick how I want to put those together in any combination I want, right? I can figure that out. And to me, that a legacy game, a Euro legacy game, is not that different. It's just opening up different expansions. You're choosing which ones you like, which ones you don't like. I want this to be more aggressive game. I want it to be more softer game. You can kind of pick the paths. So I don't think the concept is flawed. I just don't think Charterstone did it. I'll be honest, I don't think they did it aggressively enough. I just there was never any interesting decisions for me to make.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, let's go ahead then and get into our final thoughts on Charterstone. Eric, why don't you start us off? Final thoughts. Oh yeah, what did you rate it? Sorry, what would you rate it? Would you recommend it? Does it go on
10
the
game
shelf?
and 25 game shelf?
10 and 25.
So I was really hyped for this game. That's kind of what I was talking about before. I really like Scythe. I like Wingspan. I was expecting a legacy game to really blow my socks off, and it didn't. And that having been said, I want to see somebody do this better. I want to see somebody do a build your own game better. Maybe multiple empty boards, a smaller, shorter game where you can build multiple boards and play a shorter game, not legacy style, but just kind of like a build your own kind of thing. I don't know. There's something there that could be done, and I look forward to them trying again. Ultimately, Charterstone for me gets a. Oh, before I go into this, since it's been a while, I want to reiterate what my rating system means. I have 5 categories. Pop song, which basically means, is the game engaging? Can I have loud pop music playing in the background and still pay attention to the game, or is the game demanding something of me? Is it engaging me where I have to have a little bit of focus time? What I call bathroom, or are the other players' turns interesting? When I come out of a bathroom break, am I excited to know what Greg did on his turn? My own turn included. Are my own turns interesting? The what if factor. In other words, does the game give me a lot of choices? The high five factor. Can I ever feel awesome in this game? And the picture factor. Is the game attractive, or does it feel good, or something aesthetic? Pop song gets a 1 for me. What if gets a 1. High five gets a 1 star. Picture gets a 1 star out of 2. So this is a 4 out of 10 game for me.
Okay, that's pretty low. I think that's one of the lowest.
But remember, I consider I am not the BGG 7 is average, 7 and 8 is average. 5 is average for me. So this is slightly below average game. This is a 4 out of 10.
Okay. Well, we'll go to
not on the shelf.
Your rating.
Not on the shelf for me.
What's that? Yeah, it doesn't go on the shelf.
Either shelf?
No, neither shelf.
Okay.
Greg, what about you? Final thoughts?
Yeah, so I went back and forth. How do you rate a legacy game? Because is it based upon individual games, or is it based upon my desire to play it again? And so here's the thought experiment I put together for me to give a rating to a legacy game. If I could send how like in that episode of where Data he could send one number through the time loop. That was
47.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't 47. It was 3, I believe.
It was 3.
And everything came. Anyways, I don't want to get too much into Star Trek. If I could tell the pre-Charterstone me a single number about whether or not I should play it or not, what would I send back? Because I don't think it's fair to say, do you want to play? I mean, I wouldn't play a lot of legacy games a second time. So I don't think it's fair to rate it on that. I would give it a 5, which is the lowest I've rated a game since we've been reviewing. And to reiterate my scale, 8 to 10 is I love playing this game. I always want to play it. despite the group. 6 and 7 means, oh no, sorry. Hold on. Yeah. 6 and 7 would be, I will play it if the right group is around, right? It's not necessarily a game I want to play, but if the right group is around, I'll suggest it. 4 and 5s are where it's, I will only play this if someone else suggests it. I would never bring it up. So what I would hope me of the past gets out of that 5 is don't suggest playing this game to your group. And if people start asking to play it, sure, I guess if they really want to, go ahead and succumb to it. That's kind of where I'm at with it. I would never tell myself to play this campaign. It wasn't that great for me. I just didn't. It was just too boring, to be honest with you. And 12 games is a little much to be playing that back to back. If it was a shorter campaign, like 6 games or something, maybe I'd be a little more into it. But
that's what I'm saying. Like if they could do this in a small box game, something like that, where you've got multiple different boards that you could design.
But for me,
in like an hour, that'd be great.
What we're talking about here is just modules, which
exactly.
Switching Magnate has modules. I have the catch-up expansion. There's like a bunch of modules that you can pull out and try different things. There's no spoilers. It's not like, oh, what's going to come up? But I mean, it's still like you can customize the game. So games do this. It's okay to have a modular system and try different combinations, but it's not necessarily that. That's not what spoiled the game for me. What spoiled the game for me was it just not interactive. It's not interactive, and the legacy aspect was never amazing. It never blew my socks off when we opened up something. It was very boring openings on top of a boring game. So there you go.
Right. Well, for me, I think for me, the key question would be, I had a similar idea of like, if I could go back in time and tell myself without any spoilers, not just a number, but like, should I play this game? Knowing what I know now, yes or no, I probably would say no. It did make me think, though, that a lot of the reason for that, I think, to play it and to get stuck in it when you don't like it is kind of the social aspect of it, right? There were 6 people, so there's 5 other people counting on you to show up. I feel like in the future with legacy games, I don't know, I feel almost like like there needs to be some sort of provisional aspect to them where it's like, okay, we'll start this game, and after we get 3 games in, we can vote and decide whether we continue on or something.
You're not wrong. Legacy games
so that you don't
can burn you out.
Problem.
Yeah, legacy games you're not wrong, because legacy games can burn people out, because I think legacy games have to have a higher standard applied to them because of that reason. They better be really good, because you're talking about, in our case, you're talking about 2 years of time waiting to finish this game.
Yeah. And, and I just think, like, if you're going to ask your game group to come and spend that time, you need to give them an opportunity to weigh in on if that's something they want to continue to do. And I do think that, unfortunately, probably in this case for Charterstone, things that in another context would have been minor imperfections really get magnified because of the social situation we found ourselves in, where we sort of have to overcommit to an extended time with it, if that makes sense. So anyway. All right, well, I think that just about wraps up our thoughts on Charterstone, though. Do you guys know, have we figured out what we're playing next? What you're playing next?
I think we're talking about doing maybe the Estates.
The Estates.
Possibly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's what we talked about. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We've got a few things coming up. We did have a request, I think, for Sidereal Confluence, so we're going to try to fit that in. We've got our poll too. I don't know if you're going to mention that, Micah.
Oh yeah.
I was going to tell Greg to mention it. Greg?
Okay.
There's a geek list on BGG. If you want us to, a request for us to review a game, either add a game to the list or thumb the game that's already there, and we will use that when deciding on the next games. I think at the moment, there's not many people on there, but Antiquity and 1830 are 2 votes, which is the highest on that list. I would like to do Antiquity eventually. I'm actually getting the Great Zimbabwe in the mail in a week or 2, so maybe we can do that eventually. So yeah.
I will say one more thing about Charterstone, though. After you're done with it, if you don't like it, there are a ton of components that you can use to build your own board game if you want.
All right, so that's a point in its favor. So
So
Right.
if you're looking for a $60 pack of meeples, you know. where-
Yes, if you want a bunch of meeples and tokens.
okay. All right, nice. Okay, so so possibly next time the estates Charterstone will not go on either one of our shelves.
Yeah, I didn't say that, but no, I don't. It doesn't belong on either shelf.
Yeah, I figured so. But we're back into season 2, guys. How does it feel to be back? Are you excited?
I'm super excited. Yeah, we're season 2. Thank you for sticking with us, all you who have come through season 1. I tell you, I got an email from somebody saying that they were wanting to have us back. It says, "You guys are great. Can't wait for the start of season 2. A piece of the action is the single greatest board gaming channel on YouTube. Nay, the single greatest channel, period. It has set a new gold standard for infotainment across all genres and has saved both my marriage and my life. May you live 1,000 years," except for Greg. That's Tom Vassell. So
Wow. There you
Yeah.
go.
yeah,
Okay. I mean, I thought you didn't agree with Tom Vassell.
well, I mean, he's a fan now, so.
Okay. All right. Okay, guys. Well, good to be back. I'm moderately surprised that we're back, but hey, there you go. So that will be it for now. And until then, this has been a piece of the action.
I'm gonna go with B, Minosky. I actually know this was a thing. They
You've heard
always
this? Okay.
they put 47. In fact, they stopped doing it because they kind of got tired of the joke.
What was what's the when did
But
it start?
I cannot remember. It was a Next Generation, but I could not remember why it got started. But the whole Minosky thing, it sounds like something that would come from Minosky. So I'm gonna go with that. I guess
Minosky.
B is my,
Okay.
my guess. I don't know for sure though.
Micah?
I think so. 47. That's a reference to the life, the universe, and everything.
No,
the
no,
number
that's
42.
40. That's 42.
42.
No, I
This is-
know. I know it's
Yeah, okay,
42.
I
That's what
see.
I'm
Yes.
saying. Is
Yes,
it's
it was a joke about that.
it's a red herring, right? To make you think
Yeah, it's a red
Yes.
herring.
for that. So
It's just trying to filter the non-geeks out.
yeah, I guess the question would be like, how far back is this joke? But
Well, this is a Next Generation trivia, so
next generation trivia.
which Joe
Episode
Minosky and
47
Rick
was
Berman.
Berman. There's no way it was episode 40. It's got to be B or D, right? So
You don't
I
think
don't know. Let's
episode
say
47 was Rick Berman's first script? I don't know. When
And did
Rick
it say
Berman-
Roddenberry was March 7th?
March 7th?
April 7th. It was.
But wouldn't it be April 7th?
Yeah, that's
right.
true. Okay, well then I'll go with what Greg said.
I'm going with B still.
Yeah.
Okay,
all right,
I'm actually going to go with D because I think they might have screwed that up.
okay.
It's suspicious that they.
That would have
done
been my answer, except for that weird thing about April and March. So
Let's go with B and see what happens. All right, he's right. As Joe Minosky began to include it as a joke in his early scripts, which that's like he just randomly chose the number 47. Like
I thought there was a reason.
it's
for it.
hilarious. Don't you get it?
I guess.
Hold on, I'm going to Memory Alpha. Let me look this up. I do remember this being a thing. I want to do search here. 47. 47. Yeah, who attended? There is a club at Panoma called the 47 Society, which claims that there exists a mathematical proof that all numbers are equal to 47 and that the number 47 occurs with greater frequency in nature than other numbers. So that's what it came from.
Okay.
47
legit.
Society.
Yep.
So there you go.
Is that itself a joke, or is that actually supposed to be realistic?
There's a club called the 47 Society.
I
I click on it and I go to their kind of a shady looking web page. It looks like something from the 90s, but I don't know. That's what it's from though.
Okay, well, life, the universe, and everything has been solved.
There
Number
you go.
47.